Good afternoon. My name is Sandra, and I'll be doing today's discussion board on Deborah Sampson, who also went by the name Robert Shirtliff. She's famous for dressing up as a man to serve in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. You'll see on the screen the sources that I use for my references. There's two sketches for primary sources, an article by Robert Brookley, a review by Anne Lombard, a play by Terry Montgomery, and then the article we all read on Betsy Ross by Laurel Ulrich. And then for the agenda today, I'll give you a brief summary. We'll talk about the available sources for how we know about her time, how she's remembered today, and a few modern historical interpretations. So to begin with the summary, Deborah Sampson was born in 1760 in Massachusetts to a relatively poor family. Her father actually abandoned them pretty early on. So due to this, she found herself being sold as an indentured servant for most of her childhood. During this time, she learned a lot of the skills that she would need later in life, such as how to read, and then how to work pretty hard in the fields, which probably helped her during her time in the Army. After the age of 18, she began to teach a little while, but was dissatisfied, so she tried to enlist in the Continental Army. She was caught the first time, but she managed to enlist a second time under the name of Robert Shirtliff, and she was attached to a light infantry company in the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. The rest of the information we know about her Army time is a mix of legend and fact, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the legend goes that she was injured near Tarrytown. In order not to get it discovered, she actually had to remove the musket ball herself with a penknife. She may have been injured a few other times. And then in 1783, while she was serving in Philadelphia, she actually fell sick, and the doctor discovered she was a woman. Upon releasing her from the hospital, he informed her commanding officer, who, instead of punishing her, actually just gave her an honorable discharge. Within a couple of years, she was married, had a family, and lived on a farm. And then within about 10 years after that, she applied for Massachusetts State Legislature for pay. She was actually assisted by John Hancock. And then in the early 1800s, she began giving lectures on her time in the Army. This would be supplemented with a little bit of theatrics, so she would dress up in her uniform and march around with her musket. And then within a few years after that, Paul Revere actually helped her petition to receive an Army pension, and she's the first woman in the history of America to receive an Army pension. Overall, during her lifetime, her service was actually seen quite positively. Anne Lombard has a quote, "Her successful performance as a man and a soldier seems to have won her real respect. Her commanding officers helped her to conceal her identity during the final months of the war, and prominent men supported her petition for veterans' pensions in the 1790s and the early 1800s. And then she died at the age of 67 in 1827. So the sources we have on this are quite limited. Within her lifetime in 1797, Herman Mann publicized a biography on her, but it has been quoted as sensational and semi-fictional. We do have a few direct sources from her, such as her petitions, her diary, and a few letters, but most of what we have is oral history, a lot of it from the lecture she gave. And with this in mind, you have to realize that she may have been trying to justify herself in the public's eye, justify her actions, or even just romanticize her own efforts, so this is a little shaky as a historical source. Today, she's not very well known. I had not heard of her before this, which is a little surprising based on how radical she was, but I do believe this is because of that. After reading Laurel Ulrich's article on Betsy Ross, she mentions how Betsy became famous not because of what she did, but because her story embodied 19th century ideas about the place of women. I do believe that as women's roles began to be solidified in early America, Deborah Sampson was a little bit too radical to be held up as a heroine, so she was often overlooked for people that were a little bit more moderate, like Betsy Ross. Today she's been romanticized or memorialized in a few other aspects. I found a play about her that was definitely borderline propaganda. It portrayed her as hardworking, educated, selfless, independent, and very patriotic. And then there's actually a Drunk History episode that is fairly accurate, but still very romanticized and very much a little bit over the top. Her hometown has a memorial and a statue as well. And then over the years, people have used her as an example to study American identity, class, culture. Modern interpretations include gay interpretations or transgender, but the most popular filter that people look at her is through a feminist. And this has a few shortcomings of its own. It is often a bit anachronistic, and she herself was quite contradictory. She would often preach that a woman's place was in the kitchen or the parlor, which goes against her actions during her lifetime.